and Logan to meet you, and of course Stanley and Josh. Lovely to see. It brings back memories, of those days when you ate a box of Weet-Bix for breakfast and half a loaf of bread and a liter of milk. Yeah, just great. Pray for the parents. I've just been in Africa in the month of May. It was really trying and testing because of COVID things. You had to be tested and fill in online forms, and I was stopped at the airport to go have a test, and all sorts of things. But Mom's good. They all sent greetings from their little church. It's like this one. And looked at their hands. Boy, 5 years since I've seen them. Deep veins, when you get into your 90s, how they look. But still knitting away and doing little gloves and bed socks and leg warmers for people. She said, the first day, I'll make you your favorite healthy, what do you call it? A tart, Fridge tart. Now this is healthy. Biscuits at the bottom of the thing and on the rounds. Then a tin of condensed milk. 2 cups of coffee creamer, they call it cremora, powder. Some gelatine and a tin of crushed pineapple. And then mix it together and put it in the fridge. That's the healthy one. So I invited a lot of people to come and eat because I just couldn't swallow that. But they're still going and opening the church. I was just telling them here that it's amazing to see how in the big cities like Johannesburg and Cape Town, everything looks normal, apart from the 2 hours a day when the power goes off. And then some days the water goes off, but it's never synchronized. So what do you do with power if you don't have water? And what do you do with water if you don't have power? But I'd never seen potholes in not the N1s and the N2s, but like the N3s and the smaller town connections. Massive potholes. They're just doing nothing to fix the roads. And people get double punctures on the way, and bend their rims, and unbelievable. So it was a blessing to land in New Zealand again, especially when the plane came in and you saw the green, and wow. And then this morning, Wairarapa, the leaves have fallen off the trees, but it's still these patches of green and this wintry look, and the sheep doing their thing with their thick willies on. Wow, it's just wonderful. So blessed, And soon the daffodils will be coming out again. Those yellows, and man, beautiful. Well, it's wonderful to share with you, and thank you for worshiping with us. I always say, it's not what I'm going to get out of going to church, but it's maybe what can I contribute? Who can I greet with a smile? I was reading the police statistics the other day, maybe a week ago, and just the calls to the police from 2015 to this year, threatened suicide and suicide calls to the police have increased by 80%. And mental health calls to the police, people that spiral out of control and they phone the police, that's increased by 66%. I was in a church last week on the West, and I asked them, what is in the world that is reminding you that we're coming to a sort of a halt in this world, that things are sort of burning up and getting frazzled? Man, and people, we probably had 8 or 9 big things, and the war with Ukraine and Russia was one, but many others. And I'm just thinking, if ever there was a time that we need an anchor, something that lasts for longer than a week, something that, won't be here today and won't be a new app next week and then a new app after that, and then it's truly the Word and our God, truly, man. Like Matariki says, yesterday I was with the program a little bit. I wanted to learn more, but those stars, they've been there for navigators, for people looking for direction. And we know we have that morning star that the Bible promised will be there for us and guide us. Yes, beautiful, beautiful. So today is communion, amen? Mostly people think, I can't go to communion, I'm too sinful. But that's the very reason you go, right? Because we have this wonderful gift of grace. And I'm so pleased you've come. I spent time with a new couple last week in Levin, last week Wednesday. It's Floyd and Lynn. He is a classic car restorer. Wow, man, it's good to go into his garage. Whoa. I won't tell you what the address is. You might be tempted, but beautifully done. But they've belonged to a certain denomination all their lives. In fact, their parents did belong to the same one. And they shared with me around the little table that they're just coming out of this now. They need to break away. And she was telling me that in their church or denomination, they have communion once a year. There are two groups of people. Those who have immortality life, and they're the 144,000, literal. They're the only ones who will be saved. And then you have everlasting life for those who will live on the earth forever. And whenever communion is served, the juice and the bread goes past in the rows. Nobody partakes because it's only one or two who are part of the 144,000. So they came home, and you know what they did? They broke 2 generations of tradition. She had some snack things from Jewish origin with no yeast and some juice, and they sat at their table and they did their own communion. And they partook of the emblems, reminding them that Jesus died for us and gave us his forever friendship. But when they told me the joy on their faces, just unbelievable. And then constantly telling me, we need to break out of this, man. It's all mind control and it's all stuff that comes from the pulpit and we're not feeling it. And I just looked, I said, wish I could hug you, man, but you know, COVID. Yeah, so I thought today, just for Logan and Stanley and Josh, I wanted to share about a young man in Scripture, and we'll only do 5 or 10 minutes. Is that all right? So, but I want to do 2 scriptures. I want to do Ephesians first. And David, you young, I can include you with that crowd, eh? All right. So let's go to Ephesians. I'm going to ask you if you have a Bible or a phone or a tablet or something that can find the Bible somewhere. If you've memorized it, look for it in your brain somewhere. And we're going to quickly look at Ephesians chapter 2. And we're going to also go to 2 Samuel. I love Samuel. Wow, man. Samuel is great, especially when it talks about David's warriors. Men with debt and men who were losers and men who had given up on life. They became the great warriors of David's. One of them slay 700 Philistines by himself. You know, those type of heroes. So Samuel is just great. Okay, so can you find Ephesians? If you found Ephesians, put up your hand. First one, that lady at the back. You're going to get free lunch today. All right, Ephesians 2. And we're going to go to chapter verse 6. So originally, of course, the Bible didn't have chapters and verses like this. It was a scroll, right? But because they knew we would battle to find it, they gave us chapters and verses. So verse 5 says, we were all dead. Wow, don't you like that? We were all dead. We're all dead. Are you with me there? 2nd chapter of Ephesians. And when we were dead in sin. and verse 6. And hath raised us up together, all of us together, Ephesians and Paul, and made us what? Sit together. Some Bibles say, and have us seated in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. I can't tell you too much, but the Greek language, very interesting. It uses for sit or seated the aorist, which means it's a simple, absolute summary or truth. And it's the indicative tense, which means it's now. Wow. You are seated through your faith in what He's offered you. You are seated with Him at the table. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But it's really a radical truth that He said now, through faith, through what Jesus has done, Yeshua has accomplished for us, we now have the entitlement and the right and the confidence, despite where we come from, despite what we see when we look in the mirror, and the abject horror when we feel that we're inferior or we don't have this, or your status, or your strata in society, it mitigates against all of that, and it makes this plain summary of a statement, and it says, in faith then you are seated with Christ in this heavenly place at the table. Don't ever lose that. You know, when we go to weddings or banquets, sometimes they put all the names in the foyer there, and then you can find your table, right? Isn't it nice when you go down and you see your name, table 5, and you go to the table and you see the little card, Anton. Oh, who am I sitting next to? Oh, no. That guy never stops talking. Can I swap? No, you're just so pleased to be at the table, right? So that's incredible. Please share this with your young people. Many people today are displaced. What Ephesians says, you are placed. God placed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He positioned them. He gave them a role. It wasn't just a physical placement. It was a role placement. This placement is a placement of invitation, a placement of right. It's a placement of purpose to have you there. It's incredible what Paul is saying. You were dead, right? But now you're sitting at the King's table. Right, you ready for the next one? Let's see who can find. This is going to be hard. 2 Samuel. Now this is for the guys. So there are 2 books of Samuel. Who wrote the books of Samuel? Any guesses? Who wrote? Probably the prophet Samuel, right? Am I guessing right? Yep, all right. Chapter 9, Roger. So 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, chapter 9. This one we do with the prison guys often. This is a very important story. I'm going to read verse 1 and a couple of verses there of chapter 9, and then we'll do a lesson, and then in 5 minutes we'll share the bread. We'll do some foot washing. I'll explain that for you in a minute. Are you all ready? And David said, who's David? He's the king. He's new to the throne, right? Who did he overthrow? Here's a quiz. Who did David overthrow? Saul. Saul was the tall guy God appointed, and then he goes to the witch of Endor. He drifted, right? He drifted. He drifted right out of the realm of God's beautiful plan for his life. And David said, this is a question you don't want to hear if you family of the previous king. You don't want to hear this question. David says, is there anyone that is left of the house of Saul? What was the practice in those days? If you became the new king, you killed everyone from the previous dynasty because there will be an uprising. So you wipe them out. So here is the question. In Hebrew, the very first one is always very important. This sets the tone. Is there anyone left from the house of Saul that I can do favor for the sake of Jonathan, my friend? There was a servant, and his name was Ziba. And when he heard this, Ziba responded. And he was called in and asked, verse 2, are you Ziba? And he said, I am the servant. And the king said, is there anyone left from the house of Saul that I may show kindness? And Ziba must have thought, this is a plot. He's going to say, I want to give you all a bonus, and when they come, they're going to zap them, right? Ziba says, yes, Jonathan had a son. Who can tell me in verse 3 what was the characteristic of that son? He was crippled. He was lame. What paralyzed him characterized him. It's so important to hear what I've just said. What paralyzes you will characterize you. Like John 5 at the pool there. That guy didn't have a name. He was only known as the lame guy, the lady with a problem, the guy with a broken heart. What paralyzes you characterizes you. I can imagine there where he lived in that little hut, there were some drag marks in the dust. That's where he dragged himself, because they didn't have wheelchairs in those days and mobile equipment to load you into the back of a van. And verse 5, and the king sent for him to be fetched out of Lodebar, was where he lived, verse 5. You know what Lodebar means in the Hebrew language? It means rubbish dump. So there's a lame boy living in a rubbish dump, hiding away because he's the son or the grandson of King Saul. When you read a bit further on, when he meets the king, he says, he falls at the king's feet. And then he says, what am I as a dead dog that thou would look at me? Guess what the king said? Verse 7. Let's read it. And David said to him, fear not, Mephibosheth was his name, for I will surely show you kindness for your father's sake, and I will restore you all the land of Saul, thy father, grandfather. And what did he say next? And you shall eat bread at my table for how long? Forever. I can imagine this. Can you imagine that day? I asked Matthew for a nice white tablecloth, which he delivered. He's a good man. Can you imagine that day? Table is set, best china. The drapes are so imposing in that banquet room. And then there are tiles painted with David's victories. You walk in there, David was an awesome, fearsome warrior, right? He was at the pinnacle of his power, man. United with God's power, you couldn't stop him. The king comes in and he sits down at the head of the table. A door opens somewhere and the most beautiful lady comes out, and she comes and sits next to her dad. And her name is Tamar, flawless skin, bright eyes, full of life, bouncy, immaculately dressed, because it's been advertised as a high day in the king's banquet room. Then there's a noise somewhere else, and there's a guy coming, raven black, flowing hair. His name is Absalom. And he comes and sits at the table. Tamar says to Dad eventually, Dad, what's happening? There's hardly any people here. Dad said, I've invited someone you don't know. Dad, don't invite strangers, dangerous. She's talking to Dad. Suddenly there from the kitchen, the doors fling open, and a man marches down, and you can hear his leather boots colliding with the hard floor and the clatter, and he's got badges all over his chest, massive sword he hangs on the wall. That's Joab, the king's general. He sits down. There's a hush when the main doors are flung open. And all these beautifully dressed soldiers carry a man on a stretcher, probably 18 to 30 years old. Trying to work the dates is difficult. They bring this man in. Everyone stands up. Guess where they put him? At the table. At the right-hand side of the king. At the right-hand side of the king. They push the chair in. When the tablecloth covers his legs, you cannot see that he's lame. You see a man who looks normal, like everyone else there. He's been shaved and washed and sterilized and perfumed and manicured and pedicured, and he's sitting there. The tablecloth hides his lameness. It covers him. It covers his blemishes. It covers his shame. It covers his shyness. It covers his rejection, his abandonment. It covers it. When you look around the table, everyone looks just normal. Today is that moment that has been purchased for us. A moment when we can come again and have a place at the table. And you come as you are. That's why as a church we practice open communion. And we invite anyone who confesses Jesus as their Savior, as their King, to participate. And when you sit at that table, all yesterday and last week and last year and 10 years ago and 40 years ago and the generational sin that you bear scars of are covered by the cloth of the King's invitation. What a story. And it says forever. Roger's Bible, I think, said eternally. Would David rule forever, you think? Or did someone come? Well, what is the promise? It's a strange wink of the eye in Hebrew. It's a strange wink. David would not be king forever, but you will be honored forever, the rest of your life. The next king and the next king will have to buy into that covenant. And that's your promise made to you today. So to start the celebration and remembering, we ask normally that we go through the sacrament of John 13 of humility, where we meet together as Jesus did. And when he put that towel around his waist, remember? He started wiping the feet and he took the dirt from their feet onto his body. Put it in his heart, carried it to Calvary, washed it away. That's what he did. That's the story. That's what our Jehovah's Witnesses friends in Levin are dying for. And that's what the world is craving for. It's not for a select few, it's for the dead dogs like us, right? So we can all have a part in it. So we'll ask the men, and we want everyone, even if you don't want to participate, you just want to watch, join us. We say prayer. If you want to do your son's feet or daddy's feet or grandpa's feet, we'll do each other's feet. We just have a bit of water and a little towel. And Jesus said, do this as often as you can. And then the ladies will go in the foyer. See, they blessed. They go only short distance. We go the long way, but that's good. We men. So we'll go there, and then after a while, when we're done, and we have had prayer, we'll come back, and we'll share the remembrance emblems. How's that? Okay? Please feel free. Don't feel left out. Be